We've all seen the pictures, the perfection, the glamour, the untouchable beauty of Hollywood's golden age. They were goddesses, right? Flawless, ethereal, perfect. But what if I told you it was all a lie? What if the goddesses had feet of clay and in some cases habits that were anything but divine? Today, we're diving into the gutter to get the real story. We're talking about the Golden Age actresses who were rumored to be dirty, ugly, and frankly a bit of a mess. These are the secrets the studios paid millions to bury. So grab your popcorn, but maybe hold your nose. This is about to get real. So let's start with one of the most shocking rumors that has persisted for decades. 1. Marlene Dietrich. Marlene Dietrich was the epitome of exotic androgynous glamour. She was a style icon, a femme fatale who captivated men and women alike. Her image was one of impeccable, almost inhuman perfection. But behind the scenes, a very different story was whispered. The most persistent and frankly bizarre rumor about Dietrich was her personal hygiene or lack thereof. The claim? She smelled. Specifically, she smelled of fish. Where does this come from? The most detailed source is her own daughter's devastating 1992 biography, Marlene Dietrich by Maria Riva. It's not a loving tribute, it's a takedown from a daughter who felt neglected and betrayed. In the book, Riva paints a picture of a mother who was a slob behind closed doors. She claimed Dietrich hated bathing and would go for days, even weeks, without it. Riva described her mother's bedroom as a disaster zone of soiled clothes, half-eaten food, and dirty linens. She wrote that Dietrich would often just douse herself in expensive perfume to cover up any odor. Now, about the fishy smell. Riva's book alleges this was a real, distinct odor that clung to her mother, particularly her famous collection of fur coats. The theory is that between the lack of washing, the perfume mixing with body odor, and perhaps the natural oils of the furs, a unique and unpleasant scent was created. It became a legendary piece of Hollywood gossip. Columnists like Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons, who were friendly with Dietrich, would never print it, but it was whispered in every salon and studio lot. Was it true? Who knows for sure? It could be the exaggerated resentment of a bitter daughter. But it's a rumor so specific and so detailed that it has stuck to Dietrich's legacy like glue. It's the ultimate paradox. The most glamorous woman in the world, who, in private, may have been one of the dirtiest. 2. Joan Crawford. If Marlene Dietrich was allegedly dirty in a literal sense, Joan Crawford was the opposite. She was obsessed with cleanliness. But her story is one of the most famous examples of a dirty private persona hidden behind a sparkling public facade. We all know the story. The source is, of course, one of the most infamous tell-all books ever written. Mommy Dearest by her. Adopted daughter Christina Crawford, published in 1978. This book blew the lid off the Joan Crawford myth. According to Christina, their home was a sterile, cold prison where Joan's rules were law. The infamous no wire hangers scene wasn't just about hangers. It was about a woman with a volcanic temper and a desperate need for control. Christina described a mother who would scrub the bathroom floors with a toothbrush if she found a single speck of dirt. A woman who would force her children to perform endless cleaning chores. So where's the dirty part? The dirt was psychological. It was the emotional abuse, the drinking, the twisted relationships. It was the public image of the loving adoptive mother versus the private reality of a narcissistic tyrant. Biographers like Lawrence J. Quirk and Joan Crawford. The Essential Biography have confirmed that while Christina's account may have its embellishments, the core of Crawford's difficult, volatile personality was very real. Magazines like Photoplay and Modern Screen sold the public on the story of Daddy's little girl, turned hardworking star and loving mother. But the reality, according to those who lived it, was a woman who was meticulously clean on the outside, but on the inside was a mess of rage, insecurity, and cruelty. She wasn't literally dirty. She was spiritually and emotionally filthy. 3. Bette Davis. Let's talk about ugly. In the context of Golden Age Hollywood, ugly didn't mean what it means today. It meant you didn't fit the mold. You weren't a delicate, pretty flower like Jean Harlow or a serene beauty like Greer Garson. and no one was told she was ugly more often or more fiercely than Bette Davis. When Bette Davis first arrived at Warner Brothers in the 1930s, the studio executives were apoplectic. They saw her slightly cross eyes, her lack of a conventional figure, and her forceful personality, and they didn't know what to do with her. In her fantastic, no-holds-barred autobiography, The Lonely Life, she wrote about how the studio head Jack Warner called her a little fat Jewish girl and tried to get out of her contract. They tried to soften her, to give her roles as the pretty best friend. But Bette Davis refused. She fought for every single role that made her a star. She knew her power wasn't in being pretty. It was in her raw, intense, almost feral talent. She wasn't afraid to look ugly on screen. In films like Of Human Bondage, she played a monstrous, cruel waitress, and in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. She literally made herself into a grotesque caricature of a faded child star. She took the studio's insult of ugly and turned it into her greatest weapon. She became a star not in spite of her unconventional looks, but because of them. She proved that an actress could captivate an audience with sheer force of will and talent. She wasn't a beauty queen, she was a warrior, and audiences loved her for it. She was living proof that in Hollywood, true star power has nothing to do with a perfect face. 4. Tallulah Bankhead. If you want to talk about a celebrity who is proudly, defiantly dirty, you have to talk about Tallulah Bankhead. While she was more of a stage legend than a movie star, she was a massive Hollywood celebrity and the epitome of a wild child. Tallulah didn't just have rumors, she created them. She was famously witty, wildly promiscuous, and cursed like a sailor. Her personal hygiene was a subject of public fascination, mostly because she didn't seem to care about it. The famous and likely apocryphal quote attributed to her is, "I'm as pure as the driven slush." That was her brand. She was known for her decadent parties, her love of alcohol and drugs, and her habit of not wearing underwear. A famous, possibly true story has her greeting guests at her New York apartment completely nude, asking, "Hello, darling, would you like a little something?" She was a tidal wave of glorious, unapologetic filth. Biographer Joel Lobenthal, in his book Tallulah, The Life and Times of a Leading Lady, documents her life in detail. She was a woman who lived entirely on her own terms. The studios didn't know what to do with her for film. Her personality was too big, too raw, too dirty for the sanitized world of 1930s cinema. But on stage and in her personal life, she was a legend. She took the idea of a proper lady and set it on fire, cackling as it burned. She wasn't just dirty, she was divinely, inspirationally so. 5. Marie Dressler. We often think of Golden Age stars as young and beautiful, but for a time in the early 1930s, the biggest star in the world, the #1 box office draw, was a woman named Marie Dressler. And by the standards of then and now, she was not a conventional beauty. In fact, she was downright plain. Marie Dressler was in her 60s when she became a massive star. She was heavy-set, with a plain face and a booming voice. She was the complete opposite of the delicate starlets like Janet Gaynor or Constance Bennett. And the public adored her. Why? Because she was real. In the depths of the Great Depression, audiences didn't want to see perfect, unattainable goddesses. They wanted to see themselves on screen. They wanted to see a woman who could be funny, tough, and vulnerable. Dressler, in films like Min and Bill and Emma, gave them that. She won a Best Actress Oscar for Min and Bill. The studios initially had no idea what to do with her. They tried to pretty her up, but it didn't work. Her power was in her ugliness, in her every woman quality. She proved that you didn't need to be a size 0 with perfect cheekbones to be a beloved movie star. You just needed talent and a connection with the audience. She was a revolutionary figure, a testament to the idea that audiences crave authenticity over manufactured perfection. She was ugly by Hollywood standards, and for a glorious few years, she was the undisputed queen. 6. Judy Garland. We've talked about Judy before, but in the context of body image. Here, we have to talk about the mess. The dirtiness of her life was not a choice. It was a tragedy inflicted upon her by the very system that made her a star. As we discussed, the studio put her on a horrific regimen of diet pills and sleeping pills as a teenager. This created a lifelong addiction. By the 1950s and 60s, her life was a public mess. Her personal appearances were legendary gambles. Sometimes she was brilliant, a powerhouse of a vocalist. Other times she was a wreck. She'd show up late, slurring her words, forgetting lyrics. Biographer Gerald Clark in Get Happy, The Life of Judy Garland, details these painful moments. The press was brutal, calling her a drunken mess and a has-been. Her finances were a disaster. Her marriages were turbulent. Her life was, by any measure, dirty and chaotic. But here's the thing. Even at her lowest, when she was a physical and emotional mess, the audience still loved her. They saw the vulnerability, the pain, and the incredible talent fighting to get out. They weren't just watching a performer. They were watching a survivor. Judy Garland's dirtiness wasn't a secret. It was part of her story. It was the tragic price of being a child star in a system that chewed you up and spit you out. She was a beautiful, talented soul trapped in a messy, painful life, and the tragedy of it all is what made her so unforgettable. 7. Greta Garbo. Greta Garbo was the divine Garbo, the most mysterious, most beautiful, most enigmatic star of them all. Her image was one of ethereal, untouchable perfection, and when she retired at the height of her fame in 1941, she became even more of a myth. But the reality of her life in New York for the next 50 years was different. It was far from divine. It was, by many accounts, downright frumpy and messy. In the biography Garbo by Barry Paris, which is considered the definitive work on her, we get a picture of her reclusive life. She shopped at discount stores. She wore the same clothes for years. Her apartment, while filled with art, was reportedly cluttered and dusty. She was famously cheap and would walk for miles to save a few cents on a bus fare. The woman who was once the most glamorous creature on earth became a New York eccentric, a bag lady of the Upper East Side. Was she dirty? Not in the malicious sense, but she was a slob. She let the divine facade crumble away and lived a life of quiet, eccentric simplicity. The contrast is the story. The public wanted to believe she was still a goddess pining away in her castle. The reality was, she was an old woman who preferred comfortable shoes and a bargain bin. She wasn't a goddess. She was just a person. And, in its own way, that's a far more interesting story. 8. Lucille Ball. Lucille Ball is a television icon, but she spent decades toiling in Hollywood as a B-movie actress and studio contract player. And for most of that time, the studio execs thought she was, well, not leading lady material. In her early years, she was a cheesecake model, known for her vibrant red hair. But as an actress, she was often called plain or horse-faced. She was too tall. Her features were too strong. She wasn't a seductress like Lana Turner or a girl next door like Doris Day. In the wonderful book Dressler, The Story of Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz by Coyne Stephen Sanders and Tom Gilbert, it details how she was constantly passed over for major roles. The studios didn't know what to do with this ugly but funny woman, so she and her husband Desi Arnaz created their own vehicle, I Love Lucy. And what did she do? She used her ugliness. She wasn't afraid to look ridiculous. She would get covered in grapes, fall into vats of wine, stuff chocolates in her mouth, and make the most hilariously unattractive faces imaginable. She took the very thing the studios saw as a flaw, her willingness to be goofy and unglamorous, and turned it into the foundation of a multi-million-dollar empire. She proved that you didn't have to be a traditional beauty to be the most beloved and successful woman in entertainment. You just had to be funny. Lucille Ball wasn't just a comedian. She was a revolutionary who taught Hollywood that ugly could be ratings gold. 9. Shelley Winters. We mentioned Shelley Winters before as an actress who used her weight as a tool, but she deserves a spot here for her own unique brand of dirtiness. Shelley Winters didn't hide her mess. She put it on billboards. In an era when studios meticulously controlled every aspect of a star's image, presenting them as wholesome and proper, Shelley Winters was a grenade. She was loud, she was brash, and she had absolutely no filter. and her favorite topic of conversation was her sex life. Her autobiography, Shelley, also known as Shirley, is less a memoir and more a list of her famous conquests. She proudly detailed her affairs with Marlon Brando, Burt Lancaster, and a who's who of Hollywood's leading men. In the 1950s, this was unthinkable. It was dirty. It was unladylike. Actresses were supposed to be virginal, or at the very least discreet. But Shelley didn't care. She was a liberated woman before the term was fashionable. She refused to be ashamed of her desires or her experiences. She saw herself as a sexual being and an artist, and she didn't think the two were mutually exclusive. The studios and the gossip columnists might have clutched their pearls, but the public was fascinated. She was a dirty girl who told on everyone, and in doing so, she carved out a unique space for herself as an uncompromising, fearless, and unforgettable woman who lived life on her own messy, glorious terms. 10. Veronica Lake. In the early 1940s, Veronica Lake was a phenomenon. Her peekaboo hairstyle was copied by millions of women across America, so much so that the government allegedly asked her to change it during the Yowie because women were getting their hair caught in factory machinery. She was sultry, she was mysterious, she was a box office goldmine. But behind the scenes, Veronica Lake was a professional nightmare. She was notoriously difficult to work with. Directors found her uncooperative, and co-stars couldn't stand her. She was tiny, but she had a massive ego and a drinking problem that was spiraling out of control. The dirtiness here is in the tragic mess of her life. As detailed in the biography Veronica Lake, Peekaboo by Jeff Lenberg, her alcoholism was no secret. It made her unreliable, late, and often incapable of performing. Her career plummeted as quickly as it had risen. A string of failed, abusive marriages and a series of disastrous financial decisions left her with nothing. The final chapter of her story is the most dirty and depressing of all. By the 1960s, the former screen siren was completely broke. She was reportedly working as a bartender in a seedy hotel in New York using a fake name. A reporter finally found her, and the story broke, shocking the public. The woman who had been the epitome of cool glamour had died in a squalid, anonymous way. Her story is a stark reminder that in Hollywood, you can be on top of the world one day and cleaning up the mess the next. 11. Hedy Lamarr. Now let's talk about a paradox. Hedy Lamarr was, by all accounts, one of the most physically stunning women who ever lived. She was famously called the most beautiful woman in Europe. Her face was a work of art. So how does she fit on this list? Because the ugliness and dirtiness were all in her behavior. Hedy Lamarr was brilliant. She co-invented a technology that would become the basis for Wi-Fi and GPS. But she was also, by many accounts, a thoroughly unpleasant person. In books like Hedy's Folly by Richard Rhodes, she's described as being incredibly difficult, bored with acting, and dismissive of almost everyone she met. But the really dirty stories are the bizarre ones. She was a notorious and almost pathological shoplifter. This wasn't about need. She was a millionaire. It was a compulsion. She would steal cheap trinkets from department stores, a bizarre and self-destructive habit for someone of her stature. Furthermore, her personal life was considered scandalously dirty for the time. Her first film, Ecstasy, featured her nude and in a simulated orgasm, causing a massive international scandal. She had a very open and active sex life, which was a huge no-no under the strict Hays Code. The studios tried to market her as a glamorous, unattainable goddess, but the reality was a woman who was messy, mean, and had habits that were anything but divine. She was the perfect example of how the most beautiful face can hide the most complicated and dirty of souls. So there you have it. Marlene Dietrich, Joan Crawford, Bette Davis, Tallulah Bankhead, Marie Dressler, Judy Garland, Greta Garbo, and Lucille Ball. 8 women who shattered the illusion of Hollywood perfection. Their stories are a mix of rumor, fact, tragedy, and triumph. They show us that the pressure to be perfect was immense, and the ways they coped or didn't cope were deeply human. Some were allegedly dirty, some were considered ugly, and some lived messy, complicated lives. But every single one of them was fascinating. They were more real, more compelling, and ultimately, more memorable than the perfect sterile goddesses the studios tried to sell us. What do you think of these revelations? Were you shocked, or did you already know some of these Hollywood secrets? Are there any other dirty or ugly legends you think we missed? Let us know everything in the comments below. We read every single one. Thanks for joining us for this messy trip down memory lane. Until next time, keep questioning glamour.